I don't know what that is. What is that? Like a killage or something like that, I think. So having it shouldered, actually, yeah, that makes sense. The most sensible weapon I've seen so far, the Halberd. I don't think I would go double spear. That would probably cause you to tire more than just holding it in front of you. I mean, this is a pretty reasonable weapon, considering that some of the weapons that you see in Elden Ring are quite bizarre. I'm not sure if it's like supposed to be like a Shamshir or a Kriegsmesser, which is kind of like a big war knife, essentially. The cuts he's making are pretty good. You can see that he's got a guard there. Spinning, by and large, isn't something that you tend to see a lot of in European fencing, although it does happen, especially for things like crowd control, if you're fighting multiple opponents, or if you're looking for an escape. So yeah, this seems pretty good. There's a lot of like preparation before throwing cuts, which we tend to try and avoid because it usually telegraphs what we're trying to do when we're fencing. But honestly, yeah, this looks pretty good. Big fan. So yeah, the other person is using a big triangle. So a great sword of some kind. Obviously, you did have weapons like Zweihander, other huge swords that would be, again, used for battlefields, crowd control, literally for killing horses and then armored knights. So I think the gameplay is pretty good here, where you're looking to try and get inside of their guard and hit them close. It'd be similar to boxing. So a shorter fighter fighting somebody with, long arms would want to get in close and work the body. So yeah, that was pretty good. Obviously, the magic I can't speak to. So this looks like a heavier curved sword by the looks of it. Yeah. Oh, and there are two of them. Okay, so dual wielding is something that we see in medieval European swordsmanship, often with what we call side swords or spade de lato. I haven't seen any dual wielding for things like messers, but certainly for things like Shamshir, it could exist. The big cut where he's leaning his head forward, incredibly dramatic, probably ill-advised. I probably wouldn't give my opponent my head like that. Okay, so this looks like like I don't know what that is. What is that? Like a killage or something like that, I think. Yeah. Yeah, it looks more like a kind of like a, I have no idea what that is. It'd be very good for cutting, I'm sure. Swords like this, generally not very good against swords like armor. So this would be a very good cutting sword, probably not very good at thrusting. So you'd find that you're gonna be at a massive disadvantage if you come across somebody in armor. All right, superb. So maybe the most sensible weapon I've seen so far, the Halberd. Halberd, absolutely fantastic. Wouldn't use it single-handed if I could help it. It is a staff weapon. It is meant to be used predominantly two-handed. There are techniques wherein you would be using it single-handed to gain extension, or if you had something in your offhand, potentially. But a lot of the time, the things that you would have in your offhand would be designed so that you could hold the halberd as well, so like a rotella shield. Definitely one of the best melee weapons in history. You can thrust, you can cut. Again, you can see at the bottom of this halberd there is like a metal, like maybe butt spike that you could use so that you can use that half defensively. So the great thing about the halberd is its reach advantage. So obviously everything that you have, the dag, so the spike at the top and the blades, you want to keep your opponent as far back as possible. So when you're holding the halberd, it makes quite a bit of sense to hold it closer to the end of the staff with the axe at the top, so that you can keep them at a distance rather than holding it in the middle, because then you're kind of negating your own reach advantage and letting your opponents get closer to you and definitely be able to strike at your hands, which is the most vulnerable part of your body when you're using a spear or a poleaxe. Okay, so this is great. This is Poleaxe with several spikes, which would be particularly good for fighting people, again, in armor. So those are called the beaks or beck on the back, and it can punch through, a lot of different things that people would wear, like, armor to protect themselves. Also very good for hooking limbs, for dragging people off horses. So yeah, an incredibly formidable weapon. Again, smashing the floor. I know I keep banging on this drum, but that bugs me. So again, this would probably be the weapon I would choose to fight this opponent, because he is wearing full plate. This is absolutely the weapon I would use, but I'd probably be using it more for thrusts to kind of negate his reach with that greatsword. Okay, cool. So yeah, we've got something that looks like a glaive, maybe a naginata. Yeah, so again, particularly good against people who don't wear a lot of armor. You could definitely use it for attacking horses. During the medieval period, when people were going to war, they would often take the blades of their sickles off and kind of straighten them out to put them on the end of staffs so they could use those in battle, so that they weren't curved for reaping, wheat, but rather for reaping people. So that looks like it could be one of those. Okie dokie. So a kind of, again, sensibly sized two-handed sword by the looks of things. So the thrusts and cuts are very exaggerated. Again, probably wouldn't want to show this level of preparation before a cut or to lean into it, as mentioned before, because you are exposing your head, your neck, and other kind of vitals. It's also very tiring. So the stamina bar might decrease a little bit less if you weren't showing that much preparation behind the cuts. So using the sword here to get close to the opponent and stay in close would be the best strategy here. The other thing that you'd want to maybe consider is half swording. So bringing your offhand to the blade and using it almost like a quarterstaff, so that you shorten the blade and just stay in close to be able to use the end of that blade like a dagger. You can do all sorts of grappling actions from there, putting thrusts into the face and the neck and the body, and then control them, rather than to kind of play the distance game with somebody who has a longer weapon than you. So single-handed thrust, that's pretty smart. If you have a longsword, having that second hand on it, it does give you additional power in the cuts, but it also shortens your grip a little bit. So to see them blading the body and shooting that single-handed thrust is pretty nice. You see it in tournaments. It's a little bit cheeky, and there are risks to it, but it's good to see. So sword and a small shield. Oh, it's a heater shield. Okay, so again, a fantastic combination. You generally want to keep your shield in front of you. That's what it's for. So where we're seeing these big cuts, he's holding the shield behind him. It's doing absolutely zero for you there. And again, unless you're fighting multiple opponents, there can be an exception. But for the most part, you don't move your shield hand very often. So you're going to keep your shield in front of you, and the cuts that you're making are going to be kind of around that shield, if that makes sense. So you might push the shield forward a little bit to give yourself that angle of the cut on either side and to allow for thrusts. But if your shield isn't in front of you, it's just dead weight. Okay, love the thrust. The positions that he's taking to make the thrusts are actually pretty good. We see them in historical sources, so where he brings his sword behind him, because obviously when you're drawing the sword, you're drawing it from your hip. So a lot of people would have practiced having the sword at their side and making those rising cuts from their left hip where they'd be drawing the sword, sorry. So again, forward roll with a shield in hand, very difficult, I would wager. So, and again, I would say like 50% of the time the shield seems to be either behind him or not engaged. Funnily enough, I know that in games like this, the stamina bar goes down if you keep the shield in front of you and they're attacking. The reality would be that it would almost be the opposite. So bringing it up and dropping it and bringing it up and dropping it, that would probably cause you to tire more than just holding it in front of you. Shields themselves, with the exception of like Pavi shields and things like that, they generally weren't as heavy as people think, because again, you might have to hold it potentially for hours. So it doesn't need to be heavy in order to stop a sword cut, because the edges are reinforced. The shield itself can be relatively light compared to what people think. So yeah, again, just having it in front of you would probably be the most economic thing to do in terms of managing your stamina. All right, greatswords. Okay, not as ridiculous as I was expecting for greatsword. So greatswords were heavy, but not as heavy again as people think. They'd certainly be heavier than longswords by virtue of the fact that they were just bigger. That's, physics. But one of the things that you would be expected to do with a greatsword is to just keep it moving. So its momentum is its greatest attribute. So you start throwing cuts, and each cut feeds into the next. Because again, it was a very specific weapon. They could be used for dueling, but by and large, again, it's a very situational thing. It'd be used for, again, crowd control, battlefields, clearing the way for pikes to be able to make thrusts, things like that. And so when we see this kind of stop-start movement with the greatswords, the big preparation, the kind of leaning back and double chambering before a cut, they were heavy, but there was a method to the madness. So having it shouldered, actually, yeah, that makes sense. So it makes it very easy to be able to throw a cut from that right shoulder. It's probably one of the strongest cuts you're going to see. So, where they're running in with the sword on their shoulder, this makes a lot of sense. In fact, most of these things, you wouldn't have even sheathed them. You would have just held them on your shoulder, ready to throw those cuts and then start with the flourish. Okay, obviously, the Thor's hammer kind of spinning it around thing, not something I've ever been able to do, but a lot of fun. All right, Flail. Sensible Flail. All right. So Flail's pretty good at getting around shields. Okay, so, normally where I would block a strike on the shields, the Flail's just going to keep going. They're a real pain, actually, to try and predict and deflect. Even for the user, if you're not used to it, I hate using Flails. Usually, like nunchucks, I end up hitting myself more than I end up hitting my opponent. So they'd also be incredibly useful for wrapping up limbs. So, Flail's very good for, again, people in armor, because you've got that momentum to be able to strike at the helmet and just kind of scramble people's brains. And also for defending walls. Throwing strikes over the edge of walls for people who are climbing up ladders, a fantastic weapon, because you don't have to expose yourself, and they'll just go over the edges to strike them while you hang back. Okay, spear on the back. Probably not, just because any weapon on the back, and you might hear me harp on about this, any weapon on the back, very difficult to get at. Spear, more likely to be on your back than swords, I suppose. But again, you're probably just going to be carrying it. So spear, phenomenal weapon. Double spear, I don't think I would go double spear, just because, again, two hands are stronger than one, so having two hands on the spear, if I don't have a shield, is probably what I'm going to be doing. Against somebody with a sword, spear's fantastic. It's like 90% offense, so you're just hitting them high and low, and that spear point is moving far faster than the sword can to cover it. So spears are great weapons.